Hi, everyone. Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets, here with an episode of Capping the Card, where myself and a special guest are going to go through all 14 races on Saturday's Travers Day card at Saratoga. But before we get to that, make sure to press that like button here on NYRA Bets and subscribe to the NYRA Bets YouTube channel, where you can get race previews, full card analyses, racing live streams, handicapping and betting tutorials, and so much more. We have individual spotlight videos for each of the 8 contenders in this year's Travers Stakes. And I also was joined by Acacia Clement as we previewed both the Personal Ensign running on Friday and the Sword Dancer running on Saturday. Well, Capping the Card is always a really fun video because it gives people an opportunity to see top picks and top value plays for myself and a guest. And joining me this week is a good friend of mine who you know his work because he is the morning line maker here up in New York, and you also know him from Daily Racing Form, and that is David Aragona. David, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, happy to join you. And I think we picked a pretty good card to cap because this 14-race marathon on Saturday, it really has a little something for everybody, from fans of the sport, seeing the stars in action, to the people that want to bet these races. There's a lot to sink your teeth into.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. The undercard has a lot of really compelling races as well. And listen, I know myself, I tend to bloviate. And I said, I need somebody concise. I need somebody efficient with their language. That's why I have you on, to try to keep me so that this doesn't become a 3-hour podcast about a 14-race card. So let's dive into the very first race. And David, I'm going to have you go first because I don't like myself for my top pick, and we'll get into why that is. But this is a $90,000 maiden special weight for 3-year-old and up New York breds. And I'm sorry, no, it's not. It's no, it is. Yeah. And it's 7 furlongs on the dirt. And David, why don't you talk about your top pick calling an audible at 5-1?
Well, I'm intrigued to hear why you're giving another shot to geopolitics, but I mean, I'll quickly run through my opinion on this race. I mean, for me, I feel like if there's a reason to play this race, it's to play against geopolitics because she has just burned money in 5 straight starts. I mean, they've all been carbon copies of each other, whether it's the dirt or the turf. So I feel like you're supposed to find some alternative. I struggled a little bit to really find a horse that I loved in this race. I ended up on the number 1, calling an audible, who has had more chances than some others that you might perceive as having a little more upside. But I think you want to keep in mind that a lot of her speed figures were earned when she was a younger horse, very early in her 3-year-old season. Just with some routine improvement, I think she could get on par with some of these other ones. And I also believe the 7 furlong distance is really ideal for her. She tried the mile a number of times over the winter and was often just flattening out at the end of those races. I think this is the right distance to come back at. Trainer Ed Barker has good numbers off this kind of layoff, and I think it's meaningful that Irad Ortiz has taken them out. And my value play, which is the same as yours, would be Paula's Star Sister. One of those horses that I think does have some upside coming out of the debut. I think the stretch out's going to help her a little bit, and I think she was just mildly against what could have been a slight rail bias last time.
Yeah, I agree with you about the way to approach this race in general. And geopolitics, you're right, has been burning money, and it's same song, second verse. But as you mentioned, there's not a lot of other intriguing alternatives in this race. And I will say the one reason I went back to this one last time, I swear, is the blinkers. And I just go, maybe this is what this horse needs, a little bit of an equipment change. And maybe that's what allows this horse to get the job done at the end rather than fading, finishing second, just kind of finding a way to lose to other horses. And to be clear, I've bet against this horse the last 3 times out and have been making money off betting against this horse, but I just could not get to another horse in this race with the addition of the blinkers. And it's one of those things, sometimes you say stuff after a race. I remember saying after her last race, if she adds blinkers, I'm probably going to bet her next time. And well, here we are. And so, but yeah, I agree with everything you said regarding the value play, regarding Paula's Star Sister, 8-1 on the morning line for Anthony Ferrero. And like you, this one has an opportunity to move forward. Only 1 start. I think it was an educational start at that. And just tired a little bit late, but lost to a runaway winner that day who won by 6.5 lengths. So I think margin of victory is something you should take into account in this regard. But the horse showed a little bit of nice early speed. And I think this one has an opportunity to take a step forward at 8-1. Well, let's move to race number 2 on the card, which is an $80,000 optional claimer for 3-year-olds. And this one is going a mile and a 16th on the Mellon turf course, which is the outer turf course. And we ended up on the same top pick here. And I'll be interested to hear your rationale for this and maybe why you're going against some other horses in here. But for me, whenever you can get 8-1 on a Chad Brown horse with Flavian Platypus, that seems like a pretty good deal. This one has some nice early speed and is cutting back a little bit from running in these turf marathons, if you will, going a mile and 3/8, now going back to a mile and a 16th. Broke its maiden 2 back, and then I thought it ran pretty well against Allowance N1X company last time out. So Pratt sees fit to stay aboard. This is a horse, like I said, that tired a little bit late, but going longer, I think the cutback will be beneficial here. And I just think the value is here at 8-1, but interested in your thoughts on vesting in this race.
Yeah, I'm going to be interested to see how this race gets bet. Maybe I was a little generous on that line on vesting in retrospect, kind of re-handicapping the race again. But I think it really hinges on how much money the number 5 Green Light takes.
Yeah.
I've got him at 2-1 on the line. And I think when you first glance at his PPs, he looks really appealing. He's faced better horses. He's got some speed figures that just stand out in this field. But when I watch some of those replays, I don't know if I'm as impressed as I was just looking at the form on paper. He doesn't necessarily finish off his race as well as I'd like to see in some of those recent starts. He can be a little bit one pace. So I wanted to find some alternative. I'm very intrigued by the number 9 Donegal Momentum, who's getting on turf for the first time. There's a ton of turf pedigree here. He moves like a turf horse. He's just going to get bet off dirt races, so I have trouble taking a horse like that at any kind of short price, trying a new surface for the first time. So I kind of land on vesting. I think they tried the marathon distance because it was the race that came up 2 back. I don't know if he's a horse that I necessarily see as a true marathoner. And he was getting kind of leg weary at the end of even that maiden victory 2 back. And last time out, I think the evidence came in. He just doesn't want to go that far. I like the turn back. And when I go back to watch his debut race at Aqueduct in May, I think that's a better effort than it looks. He was a little steadied back into the clubhouse turn, got an uncomfortable trip after that, had to alter course in the stretch, but was finishing well. And I think he's a little better than he seems on paper. 5-6-1 maybe is what I would expect to get on him, and I think that's a fair price. And I'll jump right to my value play at the number 7 Tivere. He might go in the other direction in terms of price. I could see him drifting up a little bit. He's just a horse who has had trip after trip in his races, had traffic trouble 3 back at Churchill, was just totally blocked in traffic of the stretch of that June 7th race at Saratoga 2 back. And last time things worked out a little better. I actually thought Tyler Gaffalione gave him a really good ride breaking from post 9 that day. But once again, he had a little trouble finding a clear path from the stretch, was still finishing well once he finally found that seam late. I just think he's a horse that's a little better than he looks on paper, and he might be one that slips through the cracks a little bit in this race.
Yeah, I agree with you about the number 7 horse here. It's slipping through the cracks. Brendan Walsh and Tyler Gaffalione are usually a duo that I like taking a second look at, even if maybe it doesn't always look great on paper. I tend to trust that duo quite a bit, especially on the turf, and like taking a second look there. So definitely appreciate that perspective. My value play is the number 1 Crystal Quest for Michael Trombetta, also at 8-1 on the morning line. And this one's coming out of some pretty good races, almost won a stakes race 2 back at Colonial over soft ground. Now, one of the things that I am concerned about, or just maybe interested in seeing, is the horses run kind of in every other pattern where, maybe had some issues in a couple of those races, but has kind of started to turn into a little bit of an every other race horse the last couple of times out. But that's also coincided with running over softer ground. So I do wonder if this horse may just prefer a little bit more given the ground. And considering while we've had a lot of rain this summer, we are not having any rain this week. It's probably going to be a pretty firm turf course come Saturday afternoon. So just something to keep in mind there. But I agree with you also about, I want to go back to the point you made about Green Light. And one of the things that I've been looking at, and I think a lot of people have been looking at, is how all these Churchill Downs and Kentucky horses are doing coming up to New York. And we've seen a lot of success, but I think it's important to point out most all of that has been on the dirt, that we've not necessarily seen a lot of the turf horses coming up from Kentucky and necessarily dominating the same way we've seen on the dirt. So just an interesting distinction to make. Obviously, Rudy Brissett's got a couple of really good horses that we'll talk about throughout the card later today. But it's going to be interesting to see that one now getting the blinkers on. But I agree, at 2-1, maybe a little too short of a price for my liking with a horse that I think still does have some legitimate questions to answer. So moving on to race number 3 on the card. This is a $35,000 optional claimer for 3-year-old Nuts, going a mile and 3/8 on the inner turf course. And, this was an interesting race. These turf marathon races are usually not always my favorite to handicap. But what was kind of interesting was we went with the same two horses, just in a slightly different order. So I went with Addicted to You as my top pick and American Grant as my value play. I'll talk a little bit about Addicted to You and then turn things over to you if you want to talk about American Grant. But at 6-1, first of all, I'll just say anybody who watches this show knows I have a lot of respect for the Horacio de Paz barn. I think he tends to get his horses ready, and he's been having a pretty successful meet overall. We just saw him win a turf stakes race the other day with Awesome Check, and he had a lot of seconditis last year during Saratoga's meet, and this year it feels like he's starting to get some of those horses home a little bit more often. But this horse has some good races to run back to, particularly against this type of company. And I just think, you look back at that race 4-back, actually, and I thought it was a really strong effort there, despite having a little bit of trouble at the start. And I think this one has some tactical speed, at least, to be able to sit, within a few lengths of the pace. And I think just that last effort with Ricardo Santana up, you saw a little bit more of an aggressive ride. And I just thought this one at 6-1 provided a little bit of value. But I'll turn things over to you to talk about the other one of our two horses that we like in this race.
Yeah, my picks don't always fit the format of your show because I do love to put the prices on top. So I kind of did that here with the number 7 American Grant, though. I agree with a lot of your thoughts about Addicted to You, and he was my second pick in this race when I did my ordinals for the daily racing form, and I think he's a horse that ran really well in his last race, Addicted to You. That was a pace that fell apart. He was in close attendance to it, was the only horse involved in the pace around at the end, so I think he showed some stamina for the stretch out, and the distance is the major question for a lot of these horses. I think it's pretty interesting they carded one of these starter allowance races going the 11 furlongs because horses at this class level don't often get the opportunities to run over these marathon distances. And I think it's pretty cool to see some of these horses try something for the first time. And I'm really excited to see a horse that has been a little bit of a pet of mine, the number 7 American Grant, get this opportunity because he's a horse that I've been chasing a little bit lately. If you follow my NYRA analysis on NYRA.com or what I write for the racing form, he's had a series of trips that have just really dirtied up his form. I mean, I'll go all the way 4-back in his past performances to April 28th. He was stuck legitimately 4 to 5 wide around both turns. That is not a successful trip on the turf. And then the same jockey repeated that trip in his very next start on June 7th, when he actually ran pretty well to only get beaten 5 lengths with that trip. His next race on June 30th just got way too far back in the early stages, lost contact with the field. And I think moving down the backstretch, his rider tried to sort of make up for that lost ground and try to engage him to show some speed at that point in the race. And I like to look up some sectional times, which you can do on Equibase now to see, how fast the GMAX tracks these horses is running. And American Grant threw in a 22.3 second quarter on the backstretch of that race. Not the time that you want to be showing that much of your speed because it leaves you nothing left for the stretch drive. And then last time out, I think I was on Talking Horses with Andy that day, and I made a case for this horse at a big price, and he finished 7th, and he didn't get to show his true colors that day, but the pace of that race just didn't work for him. It was dominated on the front end by Gem Min 10, who led every step of the way, and this horse was actually finishing well across the wire. He's this long striding son of commissioner who looks to me like a horse that just wants to gallop along all day. Now he's finally getting a chance to go the 1 3/8 distance. He's getting a rider upgrade to Dylan Davis, who I would want to have on every pick that I make at this meet because he's just getting the best out of every single mount, so it seems. And he's the kind of horse that is just going to be a big price in this race because he's finished off the board so many times in a row. Those are not the kind of horses that attract attention from the bettors.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right about Dylan. I mean, just every day it feels like I'm looking up at the TV and seeing him bringing home another $20 winner or, 8-1 horse, 10-1 horse. He's been riding incredibly well and getting the most out of all of his mounts. And one thing I'll also add just in general is one of the things I do for NYRA Bets is we look at track stats and look at the winning trip analysis for different surfaces and distances. And the one thing that's been interesting is that the inner turf course has really been playing to closers this meet, with over 54% of winners coming from more than 3 lengths back at the half-mile mark. So you can make up ground on this inner turf course And I think that's just something to keep in mind. And I've been kind of playing against a lot of front end speed in a lot of these races and wanting to look for those horses that are kind of your more traditional trackers and closers. And I agree with you about American Grant getting that jockey upgrade there and have an ability to maybe show a little bit more than what he's done to this point. So it should be a fun race. And I agree with you. It's fun to see these horses do the mile and 3/8 because it's going to be something a little bit new for them. Let's head to race number 4 on the card, which is a $62,000 optional claimer for 3-year-old and up. And we're going a mile out of the Wilson Chute, whether you like it or not. And this is on the dirt. And we have a field of 7. And listen, the Wilson Chute, I think, does present some issues from a standpoint of how does this play, how do different horses sometimes break out of there, and the sort of trip and the post position, how all of this ends up playing out. I ultimately landed on the number 6. Can't hush this for Mike Maker, who has had a very, very strong meet, I think, this year, considering just the number of horses he brings up and kind of the caliber of racing that he's competing against a lot of times. This is a horse coming off consecutive runner-up finishes, but is one of these dirt horses coming up from Kentucky, and there's a little bit of that angle of, well, coming up from Churchill, coming from up from Ellis Park. Maybe, that caliber of competition they've been facing down there might help them in this spot. And you pick up Irad Ortiz Jr. on the mount. This horse has good early speed, doesn't need the lead though. And I feel like that's the sort of horse you want coming out of the Wilson Chute, where you want to have at least some early speed. I feel like if you get shuffled back early, then you're kind of out of the race in a lot of ways. And if you're too far outside, it can be an issue as well. But I like the horse that you also liked as your top pick, Banishing. So I'll let you talk about that one.
Yeah, Banishing, I think, checks a lot of the boxes that you were just describing there as a horse that can get some forward position coming out of that Wilson Chute. Something he wasn't able to do in his last couple of starts, but one of those was a turf race. He's just not a turf horse. I don't care about that. And then last time out, he was wide every step of the way, wasn't able to quite get forward, and didn't seem to be traveling that well to the quarter pole. And Luis Saez is not the kind of jockey to just wrap up on a horse, and he sort of did that in the late stages of that race. So it felt like maybe he just didn't feel like the horse was moving that well underneath him. He's been off for a little bit of time since then, and obviously went through the auction ring, and you could see in the PPs he sold for $80,000 after that race, which strikes me as a pretty large price tag for a horse coming off such a poor performance as a gelding. So, I mean, it's not like there's, that much upside with him. But when you go through the sale and sell for that much, what that says to me is that they did a check of this horse, and there's not some serious physical issue coming out of the last race. And he's coming back without a layoff showing for David Jacobson. And I was looking up some stats for David Jacobson, who can be a tough trainer to read at times and a tough trainer to find positive stats for. But when you sort of combine his first off the claim and first off a trainer switch stats, which I think is something you could do for Jacobson more than other trainers because he buys all horses for himself, basically. He's 17 for 62 over the past 5 years, 27% with a $2.70 ROI. And at NYRA, that ROI shoots up to $3.43. So I just think Banishing is a horse that if he gets back on track, his best performances are right there with everybody else in this race. So I thought he might get the right trip in here, so I made him my top pick. And as for the value play, this is the kind of race where it's hard to find a big price. My top pick is 6-1. I can't really go higher than that unless I'm making a case for Duke of Gloucester. And Costa Terra, I just wanted to highlight him because I think of the shorter to middling price horses, he's the one that I rely on to be in the mix at the end. He's just fairly consistent overall. And I think his last race is better than it looks because August 2nd was one of those days where I felt like the rail was a bit of an advantage. And he was 2 to 3 wide throughout, was actually making up some ground in a race that was dominated on the front end. So I think that was a performance that was a good one in keeping with his recent form. So I would expect him to run well in here, even if he doesn't win the race.
Yeah, he's a very honest horse. I mean, 10 for 20 hitting the board. And certainly since coming over to Linda Rice's barn, doing a lot of things right at this particular level, at this optional claimer 62. So has really turned in nothing but good performances outside of the one time coming off the bench, going 1.25 miles. So I think that race can easily be excused. And picks up, Linda uses Jose Ortiz as her kind of top rider here. And it's interesting. Linda's not had quite the same successful summer that she had last year, but certainly has still managed to turn out a fair number of winners and really live runners throughout the meet. We just saw her have a very impressive maiden score in the opener today on Thursday at Saratoga with a horse that was, wrapped up by the eighth pole almost. That one was really impressive for her. So let's move on to race number 5, though.
Let me just jump in for a sec. I want to correct something I said. That Jacobson stat I gave out, that was specifically for dirt allowance races with horses that are not in for a tag. I should have mentioned that because I wanted to look up stats for he's making a switch and he's not risking the horse for a tag. So I just wanted to put that clarification in for people that look that stat up in Formulator.
No, that's good clarification because you're right. Jacobson is in that kind of claiming circuit a lot. So the fact that this horse is protected, I think, is a key point to make there. And you're right about the sale. $80,000 for a horse that's only won $101,000 to this point and is a gelding that's a pretty strong purchase, I would say, or at least indicates that they have some positive thoughts about what this horse can do moving forward. So that's an interesting stat to share. Race number 5, $62,000 optional claimer for 3-year-olds and up, going 5.5 furlongs on the turf. And this is on the Mellon Turf course. And you went with a pretty big price up top. You went with an even bigger value play. I thought I was going to have a good value play in this race, and then you blew me out of the water with 30-1. So I can't even get you there. But David, talk a little bit about your number 2 horse, Charging, who was definitely one that I took a long look at when considering this race. I think there's a lot to like here.
Yeah, I'll admit I had trouble getting a strong feel for this race. And in those scenarios, sometimes I just end up going for prices because I find myself knocking the favorites. And I mean, there is an entry in here that I think it's going to take a lot of money and both halves can obviously win. It's just, I didn't feel so attracted to them at the price. And I think entries generally can be poor value. Charging is a horse that I've kind of been waiting to see get into the situation. And this spot is a little tough for him because when you look at his form, he can be inconsistent at times, and he's a horse that's very trip dependent, and he doesn't always show up with his best effort. But I can go just 2 starts back in his PPs and find a race in the King Leatherberry at Laurel that I think makes him pretty competitive in here. And, he only got an 86 buyer, but when you go back and watch that race, I think he ran even better than that speed figure would indicate within the context of that race because it was a fast early pace. He was up close to that pace early, actually had to be reined in a little bit by Ben Curtis to not run too fast, chasing those leaders, made an early move to take over at the top of the stretch. And then that was just a race that went to closers. He got swallowed up at the end, but he still battled on gamely to only lose to horses like Witty and Outlaw Kid by a neck. And those two would be among the favorites in a race like this. Now, the problem is that Charging's surrounding races aren't nearly as strong, but he did not get the right kind of trip last time and to get serious. He was breaking from the inside, tried to rush up, was just in a really precarious position every step of the way, not really in that hole and having to be steadied back a little bit multiple times around the far turn. He's been a vet scratch a couple of times since then. Now he's coming back for a tag. There are some question marks, but I think he's drawn well towards the inside with speed. And I know his best effort does give him a chance in here. So he's the horse that I wanted to give a chance to, hopefully getting back to one of his better efforts.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And I agree with you. Sometimes when I have a hard time with, particularly it feels like turf sprints, I end up just going for absolute prices in these spots. And I went with a little bit of a modest price, running with scissors as my top selection at 6-1 for Fernando Abreu. This is a horse that's a veteran of 62 career starts. And hasn't really sprinted much, has typically gone 2 turns on the turf, but they did turn him back and sprint him last time out. And yes, he got disqualified, obviously moved back to 8th place based off that effort. But if you just watch the race, the horse clearly showed some ability going 5.5 furlongs at this level and was able to make up some ground and was able to put in a really nice run, I thought. Gets Joel Rosario aboard. And for everything I might say about Joel Rosario in a turf sprint, there are a few jockeys I trust more than him. And he actually won on this horse 3 races back. So I just like seeing that connection to the horse and the jockey having some success and with the trainer. Now, this horse is also in for the tag now, 62.5. So that is something to keep in mind. But I just thought, again, at a little bit of a price was interesting. A horse that has, speed to sit kind of mid-pack and then make one run. And we'll see kind of how that ends up playing out. My value play in this one was a big price, the number 5 Ruse at 20-1. And this is one who is really cutting back for pretty much for the first time. And, did try 5.5 or 5 furlongs back in 2022 at Gulfstream Park and finished second that day. But this one has largely been going 2 turns. And, I don't know how much this horse has left in the tank, maybe, because this horse used to show a lot of early speed and just does not show that same speed anymore. And so there is some concern there. But Dylan Davis is up on the mount. As we talked about, he's having a tremendous meet. And I just thought this horse maybe trying something a little bit new was interesting to me at 20-1 and at a big price. I don't know. I'd be willing to find out. Maybe this horse can find kind of a second wind at this 5.5 furlong distance. And I thought it was notable that the horse is not going in for the tag and is still being protected. So there's still maybe some ambition with what this horse has yet to prove. But you went to an even bigger price, Vacation Dance at 30-1. I love it when I see that big number up there. So talk a little bit about that one.
Yeah, I mean, this horse, even in his past, has races that maybe aren't quite good enough to win against a field like this. So I'm viewing him a little bit more as a horse you might want to throw into trifectas or underneath in exotic wagers. But you don't have to go that far back in his past performances to find some of his better form, such as that race 4 starts ago on October 27th of last year, when at this level, he was a good third behind Fluid Situation and Legends Can't Die, horses that are pretty nice turf sprinters. And then I think you can make excuses for every start since then. The Turf Sprint Championship, just too tough for him. Then he switched into the Todd Pletcher barn, and sometimes trainer switches just don't work out. And also some horses just can't really go the fast paces of those 5 furlong turf sprints at Gulfstream, which just seemed to be a little bit too quickly run for him. They stretched him out to a mile at Aqueduct last time and just got the wrong trip. He was 4 wide around both turns. It was an impossible journey over a course that was probably favoring inside paths a little more. And now he's getting back to what he wants to do, 5.5 on the turf at Saratoga, where he's won a couple times before. Also back in the John Kimmel barn, who had him when he was last in good form just at the end of last year. And I think he's a horse that might be able to get back to one of his better races. Maybe it's not good enough to win, but he's a horse who can get a piece of this at a price.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to approach it. And when we talk about value plays, there's a lot of different ways to approach it. Sometimes it's a long shot that we do think has a little bit of a chance to get the upset, but other times it is a horse that, and I would say Ruse is much the same for me, a horse to just throw in your exactas, your trifectas, maybe even something as deep as a superfecta. But, we saw race today at Saratoga where I think there was a 45-1 horse that finished fourth. And, you get these big prices sometimes running up into the money for different wagers. So just something to keep in mind. And I also like Kendrick Carmouche being back aboard. Kendrick has ridden this horse before and tends to be able to get a little bit of speed out of this horse out of the gate. And Kendrick's, very good at doing that in general. Not always necessarily known as a turf sprint rider, but again, if you're looking for a jockey who's going to get some speed out of a horse, he's always one that's at the top of the list, I think, for me on this New York circuit. So definitely like that one at a price. Let's move to, I think, a pretty interesting race, which is race number 6 on the card, which is a $100,000 made special weight for 2-year-olds. I always love the 2-year-old races. Going a mile and a 16th on the inner turf course. We both landed on the same top selection, which was Insubordination, who is part of a coupled entry. Though the 1A is on the also eligible list and is third down on that list. So probably not going to get into this field, all things considered. But Insubordination is a horse that I like for George Weaver's barn. And Weaver had a very hot meet last year up at Saratoga. Has not gotten the wins necessarily this year, but he's gotten horses to run relatively well. A little bit of what I said with Horacio de Paz last year, a lot of seconditis. Same thing is true a little bit with Weaver here. This is a horse that debuted going a mile on the dirt, but that was an off-turf race that was run over a sloppy sealed track, willing to kind of draw a line through that to some extent. But I still think it's an important race to look at because the horse still ran pretty well, all things considered, and has the opportunity to take a step forward. The pedigree is all turf on this one. So you would imagine that there's going to be a perk up. But I thought the horse showed at least some decent ability in that debut race to think that there's another opportunity to move a step forward. You're going from Eric Cancel's the jockey to Javier Castellano and now hitting the turf where this horse is meant to be. So I thought 6-1 was good value on this top pick.
Yeah, Insubordination is a horse that I've had some interest in for basically this entire Saratoga meet. This is actually the third time that he's entered. He was entered once in early July at Saratoga, and I think he reared up in the post parade and ran off and had to be scratched. So when he was entered in that off the turf race, I think that was the second attempt, and he's a horse that I think, I forget if it was Maggie or Acacia discussed in the paddock, has had some issues mentally getting ready to actually race, and I wonder if they just kept him in at off the turf race to give him that racetrack experience. So it would better set him up to be a little more professional once he finally gets on the turf. And I think it probably served that purpose. I mean, I don't want to make too much of that race. He only beat a couple of rivals. There were only 4 horses in there. But to run a 55 buyer, on the dirt for a horse, like you said, who has nothing but turf pedigree, I think is a pretty good sign. He showed some stamina to stay on at the end. He's got one of those interesting European pedigrees where it's all speed on the top side, but all like marathon stamina influences on the bottom side. So I think this is probably the right kind of distance for him. And I found some good stats for George Weaver, second time starters, dirt to turf. He's 6 for 28 with a $4.40 ROI. So it was enough for me to give Insubordination a chance as he gets on the turf, because I've watched some of this horse's workouts and I think he might have a little bit of ability.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. I think maybe the first time this horse ran, you had written up the closer look notes for that particular race. And I remember you talking a lot about that pedigree, and it made me do a deeper dive into the pedigree. And you're right, it's a really fun pedigree. If you're into that sort of deep dive analysis, I encourage you to do a little bit of digging. I ended up on Racing Post and all sorts of different websites looking up, siblings and, half siblings and all that sort of good stuff. So I think a very interesting horse. Now let's talk a little bit about your value play here, which is number 8 Thunder Roll for Bill Mott. And this one has been working out pretty strong leading up to that debut on August 10th. And Mott is turning this one around pretty quickly, which is not always a typical move, but might indicate that he's a pretty live runner.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what to make of the quick turnaround. This horse feels like one that probably needed that debut race a little bit. Yeah. When you start a first-time starter going 7 furlongs, it's usually saying that the trainer thinks this is a horse that ultimately is going to want to go longer. Now he's stretching out to the 2 turns. And the switch to the turf makes sense based on the pedigree. Hard Spun is one of the most versatile sires in the game with regard to surface. And the dam was 4 for 15 on the turf. If you look at the second dam, she was stakes placed on the turf. So there's real grass pedigree here. And I'm not going to be surprised when this one takes a step forward on the surface switch.
Absolutely. My value play in this one is number 5, Papiamento, for Whit Beckman, who is, of course, the trainer of Honor Marie. And this one, again, had kind of an educational first time out, I thought. Just kind of got out there and, was maybe a little one pace, but made up a little bit of ground late, I thought, in that race at a really big price, actually, in debut at 31-1. And now gets the blinkers put on. I'm always intrigued to see that sort of, blinker and equipment change. This is not necessarily a winning move for Beckman, but it's still an interesting one considering the horse's running lines. You get this horse maybe out there on the front end a little bit more closer to the early pace. And I just think you're going to end up seeing this horse maybe being able to finish a little bit stronger, just be in a better position to be able to finish a little bit stronger at 10-1. You pick Tyler Gaffalione up on the mount as well. And again, Tyler always rides that turf course well up here. So I just thought a 10-1, kind of an interesting horse in that second start. I think in general, when I look at these 2-year-old races, we've said it for a couple of these horses, those first races are just so instructional sometimes, and they can just be things that you build on. And so a lot of times I don't get too hung up on how many lengths they were beaten by or, things like that. I just want to see, okay, they got that experience. They know what it's like loading into the gate. They know what it's like dealing with the paddock. They know what it's like just being around Saratoga with all the people and things like that. I mean, those are things that can really throw a young horse off. And for them to now be on their second start, you would expect there's going to be some maturation. There's going to be some improvement. So eager to see how some of these horses perform in this race. But in the very next race, we're going to go to race number 7, which is also a maiden special weight for 2-year-olds. But this one, we are going on the dirt, 6 furlongs. And this one, I went with a horse that I'm eager to talk about in a little bit, but you went with a couple of big prices here. So talk to me about your top selection, number 7, Disco the Q.
I'm going to guess it's Discotheque. Am I right?
Maybe? Oh, Discotheque. Oh, okay. Yeah, I see it.
Yeah. At least that's how I was going to say it. I don't know.
No, but that would be the right way to say it, David. I think.
There's a lot of guesswork to be done in this race. It's one of those 2-year-old maiden races where I didn't feel like I had a good handle on the first-time starters per se, especially the horse that you picked on top. There are no workout videos available, so I hate just guessing with horses in those situations. I kind of feel like he's going to be live, but I don't know for sure. And Discotheque is another one where couldn't find any workout videos. Was able to match up a couple of the workouts. One of them matches a maker trainee Cigarette Boat, who is a allowance turf sprinter. Another work matches a horse named Dracon, who I think must be in the maker barn now, but another allowance type. So interesting that this horse might have been working in company with some older horses. And there's some class in the pedigree when you go on the dam side. The second dam, I think, was a grade 3 place. There is the dam herself is a half sister to multiple stakes placed runners. So Mike Maker has just been seemingly sending out runners that outrun their odds in so many situations, so many levels. He's already sent out a couple of 2-year-old first-time starter winners at this meet that were fair prices. So I just feel like Discotheque is one that's not going to take a ton of money in this race and has a look of one that might be a little bit live.
Now, I do have to, after everything you said about maybe not having the best feel in the race, I feel like your value play is an appropriately named horse Shot in the Dark at 10-1. So talk a little bit about this one, making the second start for Jenna Antonucci.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of runners with experience in this race, and they're both coming out of the same race with very similar running lines. I think CK Wonder, the number 8, is the one that looks a little more appealing because he held on a little better after contesting the pace. But Shot in the Dark was the one that was dueling with that horse early, and he faded a little bit more in the latter stages of that race. But Jenna Antonucci is a trainer who doesn't usually have her first-time starters cranked up to win on debut. I often like to look at the trainer ratings in Timeform US to get a glance of what different trainers do well, especially from one start to the next. We assign ratings on a 0 to 100 scale, and it kind of shows different scenarios. And Jenna Antonucci gets a 38 out of 100 rating with first-time starters and a 79 out of 100 with second-time starters, which just kind of speaks to how much better she does when horses get that start under their belt. And Shot in the Dark, I think if he can just have gained a little more fitness from that debut run, he could run better here. I mean, he got a 66 buyer on debut, which with even minor improvement, it puts him within par for the level. So I feel like he's going to be a decent price in here, and he's one that I could use a little bit. But like I said, I just want to search for some prices in this race because I didn't have solid information on the runners that I think are going to be shorter.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely a little bit of a swing into the dark for me. It's not even a shot in the dark, but the number 3, Tip Top Thomas at 3-1. And I'll be honest, you're right about not being able to watch the workouts, but whenever you see a Todd Pletcher 2-year-old firing off consecutive bullets, you just don't see that very often. I mean, Pletcher notoriously tends to work his horses a little bit on the slower side sometimes, and you really don't even see some of his better horses firing off bullets. And so to see this young horse that has some precocity up top, volatile, I think has been, while maybe not at the level of Vekoma or Complexity or some of these other first crop sires, he's had first crop success. 4 for 22 with his first out starters, 18%. And the dam attempt to name, I should say, has produced a first out winner and is actually 5 for 8 producing first out runners hitting the board. So definitely some precocity there. Like I said, the last 2 bullets back on August 10th, first of 73. And then the one that really is eye-catching on August 17th was first of 161, which was a 47 flat bullet gate work. So that's something that just really kind of caught my eye. I Rad Ortiz Jr. up on the mount. Just have a feeling this one's live, and so that's where I went. Another one, and this is, I usually don't bring this up during shows, but I will say, have a little bit of inside information on the number 10, Sovereignty, for Bill Mott and jockeyed by Junior Alvarado. My colleague at NYRA, Darwin Vizcaya, was speaking with Junior Alvarado about this horse, and Junior just told him, he goes, I have a very high opinion of this horse. And he goes, I think this could be one of Mott's better 2-year-olds that he has. And he goes, I don't know if he's necessarily 100% cranked up for debut, but he's really talented. And so Junior had a high opinion of him and works him in the mornings. And I thought 8-1, I just kind of made a mental note of that and thought, okay, that's kind of interesting and maybe something just to keep in mind, maybe use a little bit of a flyer on this horse, or maybe underneath. Oh, it was a horse that maybe fades a little bit late in the race, just, if he's not all the way cranked up for this debut. But interesting horse drawn to the far outside, Godolphin homebred and owned. So that was my value play in that 7th race. But we will head over to race.
I'll just make a couple.
Yeah, go ahead,
make a couple notes on those horses. So I watched some of the workouts, and I would say Sovereignty. not the best away from the gate last time, but he was really
Yeah.
finishing best at the end of that work. And I feel like he's one that could be running on well. And something to note about the Todd Pletcher horse, Tip Top Thomas. I know some people don't like to see multiple gate works heading into a race, and to some people it means to them that the horse needs work at the gate. For Todd Pletcher, he almost always gives his horses at least 2 gate works prior to debuting them, and it's actually a really good sign for Pletcher when those 2 gate works are back-to-back and the last 2 works before a debut race. You often see those horses run very well when they have that pattern, because usually what it means is when they have those 2 gate works and then a race, that they were probably the winners of those workouts, which means that they sort of qualified in the ranking to make that debut in the afternoon. So I would take that as a good sign for him if some of people are seeing that and wondering about it.
No, that's a really great point. And I typically, that's interesting you bring that up, Dave, because it's something I've talked to other people about before, which is I don't mind seeing 2 gate works. I get worried when I start seeing 3 or 4 gate works. And then I go, okay, maybe there is an issue here, especially if it's repeatedly. And then I go, okay, like they didn't work something out here. Now they're going back to it. And so that's a concern. But like you said, with Pletcher, 2 in a row, that doesn't necessarily bother me, especially with how strong they were overall. Sometimes if you see a slower gate work followed by maybe a mediocre gate work, and you go, okay, there's some issues here potentially. But yeah, it's gonna be a fun race. I mean, I always enjoy these 2-year-old maiden races on the undercard of these big days, because a lot of times these trainers and the owners and the connections really want to make a big imprint on a day like today and have a horse that wins on the Travers undercard, so that they can kind of promote the horse in their next start. But let's move to race number 8, which is a $95,000 allowance for 3-year-old New York breds. And we're going a mile and a 16th on the Mellon Turf Course. And this one was a kind of an interesting race for me. And I went to a trainer that we've not talked about yet, but who is incredibly hot. And that is the trainer for the number 4 Clear Conscience, 5-1. And that is Mark Casse, who has been turning out winners all over the place. I will say he's had a lot of 2-year-old success this meet in particular, but Cassie's been 31% during this meet, picks up Jose Ortiz on the mount. This horse has come in with back-to-back second place finishes the last 2 times out, and it admittedly probably needs to kind of make that move forward. But I think at 5-1 is at least a decent enough price for a barn that is tends to be pretty hot right now, and is actually coming out of the Lisa Lewis barn, is making the first start for Casse. Horses managed to get a work in the new barn as well, which I like to see. And like I said, picks up Jose Ortiz there at 5-1. The horse obviously needs to finish a little bit more. 1 for 9 winning, a lot of underneath finishes, which is something that does concern me sometimes in those running lines. But I just thought a horse that had some tactical early speed to be able to sit within a few lengths of the pace and then make a move at the top of the stretch. And Jose has been riding the turf, I thought, relatively well during this meet. But interested in you talking a little bit about Final Denial as your top pick in this race.
Yeah, I mean, I think the prices on a lot of these horses depend on how much money the number 5 Rhetorical takes, because he was a horse that I know turned a lot of heads on debut when he drew off to win by 5 lengths, first out for Will Walden, a horse that had generated a lot of buzz coming into that race to go off the price that he did. And I know the buyer didn't come back that fast. The Timeform US speed figure just towers over this field. So I kind of wonder what we're going to get from him second time out and how much money he's going to take. But assuming that he is the favorite here, I wanted to prove it to me against a better field. I was just looking for some horses that are going to be better prices. One of those is the number 1 Final Denial, who has something to prove stretching out in distance for the first time. But this is a horse that I think has the pedigree to go longer for sure, being by Mendelssohn, who I've really taken a liking to as a turf sire. I know he doesn't get so many of those grade 1 quality horses, but when you look up his stats, I mean, he just gets nothing but runners, and they all seem to take to the turf. And on the bottom side of this pedigree, it's really not a sprint pedigree. There's a lot of stamina influences in here. It's a Chester and Mary Broman family that goes back a little ways. The second dam was a very good dirt router. So there is stamina there. And I wonder if Christophe Clement just, broke this horse's maiden going 6 on the dirt and said, well, I think he's a turf horse. Let's just go to 6 on the turf. And he ran so well that they kept him sprinting. But to debut this horse going 7 furlongs, I think at one time there had to be some thought to stretch this horse out eventually. And I think they just may have wound up going in the other direction because those are the races that came up for him. now he's stretching out in distance. Watching him run, I don't think he's going to have a problem with it. He's drawn well towards the inside in a race where some of the others that I like were a little hindered by post position a little bit. So I just thought if he's around that 10-1 line, I could take a price on him, even making that stretch out, which typically isn't a move that I love.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, a lot of times with the Christophe Clement barn, when I see those types of moves, there's a certain level of confidence you have with certain trainers to just go, this trainer knows what they're doing, particularly on the turf. And so stretching this horse out from those sprints to routes, I think makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting, Mendelssohn, that's a sire that I've also really warmed up to over the last, year or two. And it's interesting. I was at the Fasig-Tipton sales a couple of weeks ago up here at Saratoga, and there's a lot of excitement about Mendelssohn in the New York bred world because of the incoming Tapeta track at Belmont. And there's a lot of thought that Mendelssohn is going to be a very effective sire for some of these New York bred horses. So going to be an interesting thing to keep an eye on. But you were speaking of post position, and you went to the inside, you went to the far outside with your value play, Rabaha at 10-1, a horse that I really like, but I was a little concerned about the post position, but certainly talent there for sure.
Yeah, I'm all about the bookends here. Rabaha, I mean, he showed the talent too back when he broke his maiden to hang with a field like this. I mean, that 85 buyer, you can look back and poke some holes in it because some horses came back to maybe not run quite as well. But if it's high, it's only high by a few points. And he was a visually impressive winner that day. And he tried winners for the first time in the last start in late July. And the trip just really didn't work out for him that day. I mean, he got cut off heading into the clubhouse turn, got a little rank after that, was just in an uncomfortable position behind him between horses a lot of the way. And when you watch the race where he was successful, as opposed to his other three races, I think it becomes apparent that he is a horse that has this long stride that sort of needs to get into his own rhythm to have success. And when he's kind of stopping and starting in behind other horses, that's when he doesn't run well. So maybe the outside post could actually be a bit of a blessing in disguise for him, because it's going to give Kendrick Carmouche an opportunity to get him into that better rhythm and go forward, not worrying so much about finding position around other horses. He might be in for a wide trip, and that's a little bit of a concern, but there's ability there, and I think he's going to be the right kind of price.
Yeah, I agree with you about those horses that have those big, long strides and need a little bit of time to get into them. And those outside post positions can be rather advantageous. I'll just touch very quickly on my value play in this race, which I think is probably more of an underneath play in my opinion, but that's the number 7 Miracle Mike, 8-1 for Tom Morley with Javier Castellano up on the mount. And this is one that's just been incredibly consistent the last several times out on the turf. Basically has run that mid to high 70 buyer speed figure, has kind of shown up, run third the last couple of times out, won an optional claimer starter allowance, 4 back. The race 3 back was taken off the turf. So you just kind of, at least for me, I just kind of tossed that effort. And you look at the rest of those efforts, and they're all pretty consistent to be at this price or at this level, I should say. And again, at 8-1, maybe a horse I'm more interested in including in an exacta or a trifecta than rather necessarily as an up top play. But I thought one that at 8-1 provided a little bit of value. Well, let's head to the slate of 5 consecutive graded 1 races on the card. And that is starting it off with the Sword Dancer, a grade 1 going 1.5 miles on the inner turf. We agree on the value play, but we disagree on the Appleby. You went to the other Appleby. I went to the main Appleby. I can't believe I picked the Appleby that doesn't have William Buick on. But talk a little bit about measured time in what is going to be a fascinating race, because these two horses put on a show the last time each of them ran in the Diana and the Bowling Green, respectively, or the Manhattan, I should say.
Yeah, it's kind of choosing between the Appleby that you know really well versus the Appleby that you know a little less well. And I went for the one that's a little more unfamiliar to us in the number 2 Measured Time, who does have some things to prove coming into this race, because Silver Knot, I think you don't have the question mark of the distance. He's already proven that he's at his best going that far. And Measured Time hasn't done that yet. He tried the 1.5 miles one time early in his career on an all-weather surface overseas, and it was one of his least impressive races over there. But he's had time to mature since then. And I think it's interesting that Appleby is giving him this chance, not only to try the distance, but to do so racing against his stablemate. And together, these are 2 of the best turf horses that we've seen compete anywhere in the country. I mean, kind of up there with Cogburn, there's Silver Knot and Measured Time. And I mean, they're 3 of the most impressive turf horses that we've seen on the track this year. So not only interesting, but also a really sporting decision of Charlie Appleby to run these two against each other before the Breeders' Cup, when so many trainers have a couple of top horses in their barn, and he has way more than a couple, but is kind of looking to just separate them and run in the paths of least resistance heading into the Breeders' Cup. And I mean, he's seeing if these two stack up against each other, which I think is just a really cool thing. Measure Time, he's of course the half brother to Rebel's Romance, who wants every bit of this 1.5 mile distance. Measure Time is a son of Frankel, so we'll see if he actually is able to get the trip on Saturday. But what I liked about watching back his Manhattan is, as impressive as he was during the race, and he was really impressive because William Buick made no attempt to save ground at any point in that race. Just knew he could go 2 to 3 wide around the field and still win easily. I mean, he rode him with the utmost confidence. But beyond that, after the wire, they could not get this horse pulled up. I mean, he just kept galloping out into the clubhouse turn, opening up on the field, and William Buick had a tougher time trying to pull him up after the race than he had riding him during the race. And it just feels to me like this is a horse that has matured and gotten better over time. And the fact that they have the confidence to try this grade 1 against Silver Knot, I think it's a good sign. And if he is indeed the second choice, then maybe he's offering a slightly better value, in my view, than his stablemate.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I feel like this is a race that's going to obviously kick off our late pick 5. And it really does put bettors, I think, in a little bit of a conundrum, because I think, general rule of thumb is you don't want to include 2 horses that are going to be even money in 7 to 5 on your tickets and double the cost of your tickets. And so it really kind of forces you, which Appleby do you like? If you think these 2 are the class of the field, and I think we both do. I ultimately went with the other direction with Silver Knot, a horse that you mentioned how Measure Time matured. Silver Knot, another one that just took such a nice step forward from 3 to 4 years old, it seems like, and has just become such a good horse in this marathon turf division. And Flavien Prat has ridden this horse to victory the last 3 times out. And the Bowling Green was just so impressive, setting a track record and doing it without even really being asked for his best. And just got out up front and was never really tested at any point. And one of the things I like about Silver Knot is that versatility. A horse can sit off the pace and he can kind of stalk the pace, or he can take the lead if necessary. So it gives him a lot of options. But it's interesting because Measure Time's a pretty fast horse as well. So these 2 are likely to be part of the early pace scenario in this race. And again, kind of interesting tactics here in terms of who's going to take to the lead, who's going to be wanting to sit second. And listen, it's hard to make a distinction between these 2. And you're right, if Measured Time's a little bit of a better price, maybe of the better value, because these 2 are just outstanding. And I think actually 2 of Appleby's best horses that he has at all. So Cinderella's Dream is a 3-year-old that I really like that he has also. But, these 2 are just so impressive in this race. We both ultimately, though, landed on Far Bridge as a value play. And this is a one coming out of the Clement barn at 8 to 1. And this was a horse, David, I liked this horse so much last year. And I thought this horse was going to take more of a step forward this year, and has been facing tougher and maybe just not doing quite what I thought. But I was talking with Acacia Clement, who knows a little bit about this barn, needless to say. And she said the post positions the last couple of times out have just not done this horse any favors. There's a horse that likes to run on the inside. And what's so interesting about this horse is he doesn't just like to run covered up, because a lot of European horses like to run covered up. He likes to make his move inside as well. And he doesn't like to angle out at the top of the stretch. He prefers to stay inside and hug the rail all the way up, which is such an interesting riding style, quite frankly, that you just don't see many American jockeys or horses do. So I thought you get Joel Rosario up on here. Joel's ridden this horse a couple of times before in the American Turf and the Pennine Ridge, and as well as in debut where he beat Carl Spackler. I don't know. I thought this one, if any horse can upset the 2 Applebys, I thought it was this one, an interesting horse nonetheless.
Nobody loves to make that rail move more than Joel, who is always finding that spot along the inside, much to my chagrin earlier today. But Far Bridge, look, I don't think he can win the race, because beating 1 Appleby, let alone 2 Applebys, is going to be a really tall order. But I will say he had no chance with the trip that he got in the UN last time. I mean, he was legitimately 3 wide around all 3 turns. You can't get that kind of trip and be successful in a race like that. So he's better than that, but it's going to be tough to beat the favorites here.
Yeah, it definitely is. And he's a horse that, again, two back, you look, he was, 2.5, 2.25 lengths beaten by measured time. So listen, he's not that far off maybe on his best day. And sometimes some of the simplest ways to play is just to do a simple exacta with, if you really think measured time is going to be your favorite or your top choice or silver knot, hey, just do a 2-3 exacta or a 4-3 exacta or something like that. Try to make a little bit of money that way. But let's head on to the next race, which is the Ballerina Handicap. And I was a little surprised that both of us ended up going against your even money favorite, Vava, who is really good at 7 furlongs. But we ultimately both landed on a horse that I'm just intrigued by in terms of Scylla for Bill Mott coming out of the Clement Hirsch last time out, finishing second to Adair Manor, who's has to be considered one of the top horses in that distaff division, certainly one of the potential favorites going into, or certainly one of the top favorites going into the Breeders' Cup, because she's really taken a step forward this year, it feels like, and matured. But this is a horse that won the Fleur de Lis 2-back, and now suddenly Mott cuts this horse back on 3 weeks rest, basically, and enters her in a grade 1, going 7 furlongs. You just don't see these types of moves from Bill Mott very often. And, it's interesting when you go back and look through the past performances, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this. It does look like her best efforts are going around one turn. And, those 2-mile races at Churchill, even the debut, it's like she was dominant doing those things. And then the pedigree, I think, just says, oh, she will want more ground because she's obviously the full sibling to both Tacitus and Batten Down, who we'll talk about later in the card. But maybe she's just a one-turn sprinter, and she could be a really, really good one potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I see good things and bad things with Scylla. I mean, the good is, I agree with your assessment. I think that the turn back is actually going to really work for her, because you go back and watch some of those races, and I mean, she showed a nice turn of foot, even just to win on debut, going the 6 furlongs. I mean, she traveled so well into that race, going a faster pace of a sprint distance, and they stretched her out because of the pedigree. But I don't know if she really ever got any better as the distances got longer. She just kind of kept running those same races, and maybe it sort of masked the improvement that she otherwise would have shown. And I think the need for a turn back became so clear in the last race in the Clement L. Hirsch, when she sort of ran off a little bit on Mike Smith and moved a little too soon and got caught by Adair Manor at the end. Not that it's any disgrace getting caught by maybe the best older female in the division. But it is interesting that turning back and doing it just 3 weeks later. I think when these grade 1s come along, though, you got to run in them. I mean, you could wish the Ballerina was 5 weeks away instead of 3, but once you kind of learn something about the horse, this is the race that's coming up. And either you wait to turn her back in the Breeders' Cup, or you do it now. And I think it makes some sense to do it now. The bad news is, I think I got this line wrong, and I think 7-2 is a bit of a dream on Scylla. I would have had the prices a lot closer between her and Vava if I could do it again. Vava's going to be the favorite, but I've seen everybody pick Scylla in this race, which I kind of understand. She's sort of the obvious new face, the alternative, and there's seemingly upside there. One more thing I would note is if you look up some stats in Formulator for Bill Mott, he has really good numbers turning horses back, not just in general, but specifically in graded stakes races. And you kind of think about some of the horses he's done this with over the years, the Cody's Wishes, the Elite Powers, the obligatories. I mean, he's done this a number of times. So I think it makes some sense. And I expect her to run really well in this race. I just think you're probably going to get 5-2 or 2-1 on her.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, because a horse like Society is also in this race, who's probably going to be controlling speed, or at least competing with it, with the number 8 Money's Gold, who is entered in a race on Friday on the turf. So we'll see where that one goes. I would imagine Todd's going to run this horse here, but does have a turf work. So we'll see. Maybe he had some plans for this one to change surfaces. But I will briefly mention a horse that, David, you had mentioned you have a couple pets. I have a couple pets as well. And Positano Sunset is one of those. And this is a horse I've always really liked for Ian Wilkes, going back to those Gulfstream Park races, and even going back to some of the races in Kentucky before that. And this horse, I think 7 furlongs is the right distance. I think this horse is going to run into some pace. Obviously, again, if the number 8 Money's Gold runs, then I think that there's a little bit of a match race up front between her and Society. I think that sets up perfectly for a horse on the inside rail. And I just think this horse at 15 to 1 at a really big price could maybe run up into something. Obviously finished second last time out to Vava, earning that 97 Beyer speed figure. That was third race back on the farm cycle after a pretty significant layoff. And the horse has been training extremely well leading up to this race. So just at 15 to 1, again, more of a horse to consider using underneath. I'm not saying that this is a horse that's going to win this race, but interested in your vertical exotics, throwing at a big price. If you like Scylla, if you like Vava, maybe throw in Positano Sunset as well, and a trifecta might be able to enrich it. So it's not just kind of two favorites in this race, but this should be a fun one because Vava, listen, talk about a horse that really doesn't do much wrong, particularly at 7 furlongs for Cherie DeVaux. But I think one of the things that's so interesting is a lot of the horses that she has been pressed by have typically been horses that I think would get the better of her at 6 furlongs, but she just really benefits that last furlong. Now suddenly you're dealing with Scylla, who she can run the 7. That's not the issue. I mean, she has the foundation to go longer, so she doesn't necessarily have that advantage over a horse like Society, who may shorten up a little bit late and things like that. So again, going to be a really fun race in this one.
Yeah, and I don't have a value play for that race. I didn't want to make up an opinion I don't have. I view it as the two main players.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And let's head to the number 11 race, which is the Forego, and another grade 1, 7 furlongs on the dirt. This one's for the boys, and you and I are both fading the favorite in this race, which is the number 6 Mulligan. And much to my father's chagrin, we're both fading his favorite horse, Baby Yoda. But we can give a shout out to my dad real quick, who is the number 1 Baby Yoda supporter, and will inevitably text me on Saturday and ask me to put down a $2 show bet on that horse because he lives in South Carolina and sadly cannot bet. But I might have just admitted to a federal crime.
He's also the number 1 person to have people blocked on Twitter too, right?
Yes, he has somewhere between 20 and 25,000 people blocked on Twitter, and
I'm one of them.
He did it. Sorry about that, David. We're going to work to try to get that undone. And so it's trust me when I say it was not intentional, and the man has no idea what he's doing on that thing. So it is just one of the many storylines about my father. But listen, let's talk about this race. Like I said, we both went past Mulligan as the favorite in this spot. You went to horse Angkor, who I know our mutual friend Gino Piccola, I talked to him. He's a big fan of this horse as well. At 12 to 1, it's a nice price if you can get this one home.
Yeah, so the way I look at this race is Mulligan can win, obviously. But I feel like with all those wins showing recently, being undefeated this season, I think people are going to sort of want him to be the heir to this division coming into this race, because this division kind of needs somebody to step into the shoes of leading it. I mean, it's so wide open right now. I mean, aside from the Chosen Vron out west, there's just nobody on the East Coast that's really the dominant sprinter in this division right now. So maybe this race kind of decides that a little bit. But Mulligan, to me, he's just faced weaker company in his recent starts. He needs to prove it here. I know this isn't the strongest Forego that we've ever seen, but I think it's still a tougher race than he's been competing in recently. So I didn't want him, and I was looking at some alternatives. And of the alternatives I was considering, I thought the one that was going to offer the best value and be the best price was Angkor. And speaking of class, as I'm looking at the races that some of these horses are exiting, you might take a glance at the races that Angkor is coming out of and say, well, they're just listed stakes and allowance races. Does he really class up? But I think if you look beyond the gradings of these races and who he was facing, you could argue that he's kept some of the best company of anybody in this race. 3 times in a row, he's faced Close the Game Sugar. And you can make an argument that Close the Game Sugar has turned into one of the best dirt sprinters in the country right now. Went out to California and chased home the Chosen Vron to be second in a grade 1 very recently. And Angkor actually beat that rival, Close the Game Sugar, by 4 lengths, 3 starts back. It didn't run as well in the Aristides, but the trip that day didn't work out for him. Skelly was in that race. I think Martin Garcia was very concerned with not getting engaged in Skelly, and I think in doing so sort of just disengaged Angkor from the race completely. But came back last time and ran a competitive race against Close the Game Sugar, who I believe, if you're running in this race, would be the favorite. And I thought based on the last race, Angkor put in a performance that makes him competitive here. I like the 7. Phil Bauer seems like every horse he sends out outruns its odds at this meet, and he's drawn well outside for a horse with that running style. So I just think he's pretty interesting and might get somewhat overlooked in this race.
No, I couldn't agree more. And give a shout out to our friend Sarah El Badwi and one of her pets. He also beat Hoist the Gold, the grade 2 winner of the Scar Mile last time out as well. So you're right. I think it's so important. I think so many times in these sprints, both turf sprints and dirt sprints, sometimes you find these listed stakes races that really have strong fields. And you have to kind of dive into the field rather than just looking at the class level. Couldn't agree more with you about Angkor and Phil Bauer. Yeah, turning a lot of stuff out live right now. I ultimately went right next door to Cherie DeVoe's horse Cagliostro as my top choice. And this is one who, again, another horse a little bit like Positano Sunset that I've always been a really big fan of. And this is one that's been training incredibly well coming into this race and seems like the one turn setup might be what's best for this horse. I remember that second place to Scotland way back in 2023 and where he really closed from the back. But I think this horse has shown a little bit better early speed with the addition of blinkers last couple of times out. And obviously can handle going 2 turns, ran, I thought, a really good second in that Blame to Highland Falls. But then came back in the Hanshin and got the job done over Tumbarumba, who I think is a really honest runner. And, maybe he's more of a Gulfstream Park horse, but it's still a really good horse. And that's very consistent. And then a horse like Raise Cane, who's a solid horse in his own right. So again, looking at class and who he's been running against, I think there's something there. Horse has been the model of consistency in terms of speed figures. Has kind of answered the questions of whether he can win off Lasix, at least with that last win in the Hanshin. Like I said, has been training well at 9-2. Should offer a little bit of value. Jose Ortiz back aboard, having ridden this one 2 and 3 starts back. So that's where I went as my top pick. But we both like the number 5 Run Classic for Jose D'Angelo as a value play at 5-1. And this one, to some extent, it was the same sort of thing in terms of looking at the class, but then second start after that long layoff, having run overseas this spring.
Yeah, he's a horse that when you kind of draw a line through that Golden Shaheen overseas, which he didn't get the best trip in anyway, he's got form that makes him very competitive in here. And when you especially isolate his one-turn sprint races, he fits really well. Just a string of speed figures that put him in the mix. Probably hasn't faced company that's as strong as some others in this race, aside from that race in Dubai where he didn't run so well. But I think he's going to be every bit of that 5-1, whereas, well, our friend Andy Serling told me that he thinks Cagliostro could be favored in this race, which I don't quite agree with, but I guess he's the kind of horse that might be drawing some people in. So, I mean, if the prices on those horses do diverge at all, I think it could be Run Classic. That's the one that's drifting up a little bit. So I think if you get paid on him, you can overlook the fact that maybe this is a slight class hike. But no, this is a horse that has shown ability, going all the way back to the start of his career. And I've always liked him going a little bit shorter. So I think he's one that's going to run well in this race.
Absolutely. I think so too. And well, we might talk about another opinion that Andy Serling has that I might disagree with here in a race or two. But for the most part, I agree with Andy. But every once in a while, I have to disagree. Let's talk about the A-Challenge Jerkins, the next race, the grade 1, 7 furlongs on the dirt for your 3-year-olds. David, I said it to somebody. I said, I think this is the most exciting race outside of the Breeders' Cup maybe this year for me, just personally. This is a absolutely loaded field. I think you can make a legitimate case for maybe 9 horses to win this race out of the 11 that are drawn in. And that might even be underselling the 2 that I don't think you can make a case for, because this is just an incredible lineup of sprinters. I mean, you just talked about how there's not an East Coast horse that's really stepped up to take the mantle as the top sprinter. Well, they're coming next year, that's for sure, because this is a really strong group of 3-year-old sprinters. And I just want to start off by asking you, when you look at this, was this the most challenging line to make on the day, or kind of how you approach this race from the standpoint of making the line? Because my gosh, to make a distinction between some of these horses had to be difficult.
It was a tough line to make for the top 4 or 5 choices, especially because, I mean, I think I know who's going to be the favorite in this race in Bookham Dano. I mean, I feel like he's a horse that has a base level of support, but kind of figuring out how they were going to bet the domestic products or the Timberlakes, or I mean, the horses that haven't really been facing these types in the past, the turnbacks, they were tough to peg. A horse like Speakeasy or World Record, who's kind of got that one number last time. I'm not confident that I kind of have the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th choices ranked in the right order. But not easy when you've got horses coming in from multiple directions, as is the case with this race. And, you say it's a really interesting race to handicap, and I completely agree with that. And yet I landed on the horse that I think is going to be the favorite, which you're often trying not to do. But I don't think Bookham Dano, even if he does go favorite, is going to be that short a price just because this field is so competitive. And I just think this horse is really good. He shows up every time. He makes his own good trip. And he yet maybe doesn't quite get the respect that he deserves. I mean, I've seen different takes on this race, and he's not necessarily viewed as far and away the most likely winner. I've seen some other people that are looking very much forward to betting other horses in this race. And I just trust Bookham Dano to run his race going to 7. I love the decision by the connections to show up here. They had the option to go to Charlestown instead and take the path of least resistance. I think it's a great sporting decision to run in this grade 1 instead, when maybe there isn't the same upside for them having a gelding that they could have around for multiple years, as opposed to some of these others who might be whisked off to the breeding shed if they win this race. So I love having him in it. And, I wonder if the fact that IRAD is on somebody else is maybe going to even drive up the price a little bit further. Probably shouldn't. I think people read too much into that stuff, and I'm sure IRAD and his agent kind of thought, well, we don't have a commitment from Bookham Dano, let's get him mounted in this race. And I think IRAD is a mount in every single race on Saturday, so they did well in that department. But just taking apart Bookham Dano's races, when I watch back the Woody Stevens, I mean, it was even better than I remembered. That was a suicidal pace. He was not nearly as far off that pace as other horses who were involved in the finish. He made the first move to break that race open at the top of the stretch, opened up on the field in mid-stretch, and still had enough to find a little bit extra at the end to hold off Prince of Monaco, who was really charging late. I thought it was a stellar performance. I'm not going to hold the margin of victory in the Jersey Shore against him last time, because Little Knee is a really good horse. And also, Dano was just better going the 7 furlongs. So, I think this is a great spot for him, and I believe he's the most likely winner by a ways. So that's why I ended up on the favorite.
No, listen. It's a race where I've seen a lot of people go, "Oh, I'll try to beat Bookham Dano." And I think it's simply more. I think it's less about their opinion or lack thereof in Bookham Dano, and more about just how many potential options there are in this race, and horses that provide upside and maybe some potential talent. And I ultimately landed on the second choice, which is not very creative either, in terms of the number 5 Prince of Monaco, the horse that you mentioned that was 16 lengths back at one point. And you're right, that was an incredibly suicidal pace that they ran that day in the Woody Stevens. But what impressed me so much about that horse, obviously trained by Bob Baffert, coming in from California for that race, was that was the first start in 7 months. And this was the first start in 2024, and almost ran Bookham Dano down at the end. Prince of Monaco just looks to be a very, very good one-turn horse. And really the only blemish and the only kind of negative race was that 2-turn Breeders' Cup Juvenile, where clearly that's just not going to be in his arsenal in terms of going long. Baffert brings him back on the East Coast, and I thought that was kind of interesting. Now you're right. There's only so many grade 1s, but at the same time, I thought, geez, Bob could have maybe kept him out in California because the Breeders' Cup is out there. Just keep him out west. Don't have to ship him back east. But the fact they're shipping him back here in this tough of a field, I think really speaks to the level of confidence he's got. Second now start for the year. And he's one that has good early speed. And there shouldn't be as much speed in this race as there was in that Woody Stevens. I don't think they'll go quite as fast up front. So I would imagine Prince of Monaco and Bookham Dano will both be traveling kind of more of a tracking trip, I would imagine, within a few lengths of the race, rather than this strung out field that is, 10, 15 lengths back at second call. My value play in this one went against your value play last time out, and World Record got the win in the Amsterdam. And this is a horse that, I don't know, just dumb luck has drawn the rail now 4 consecutive races in a row. So it's got plenty of experience breaking from the inside rail, which I'm glad to see, because usually I don't like that in sprints. But this one, Rudy Brissett put the blinkers on, and that seemed to make all the difference in the world last time out. And this horse just broke like a rocket and never looked back. Now, this time, it might not be that easy. Little Knee on the far outside, I think, has really, really good early speed and is going to want to be up and forward and potentially engaging World Record. But I just thought at 8-1, a horse that maybe Rudy's got the right combination of things there. Obviously does lose Flavian Pratt, who had his choice of horses among many in this race and ended up on Domestic Product, who we haven't even talked about yet. But I thought 8-1 was a little bit of an interesting horse. But you went to the horse that actually went off favorite that day, and now you're getting a much better price on a horse like Jefferson Street at 12-1.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that the actual margin in ability between World Record and Jefferson Street is as great as the actual margin on the track in the Amsterdam, because while July 26th wasn't one of the most biased racetracks that we've seen at the meet, I did think it was one of those days where rail position was an advantage. And once World Record broke so alertly from the inside and was able to get to the front and the inside, I think it might have enhanced his performance a little bit. And maybe chasing outside by Jefferson Street wasn't the best trip that day. But I do like his outside post position for this race because there is speed near, as you said. He can sort of let Little Knee cross over in front of him if that one wants to go forward and just kind of perch outside and see what happens in front and maybe make that move to pounce at the quarter pole. Is he quite good enough to beat the likes of Bookham Dano, Domestic Product, and Prince of Monaco, some others? I don't know, but he does have that buyer two back that puts him right in the mix. And like you said, he's going to be a much better price than he was last time. So I think if you're going to hop on the bandwagon of a horse, maybe a start or two too late, you want to do it when it's at the right price. And he is going to be here.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, I'm glad you mentioned both Domestic Product, who is just an intriguing horse. Obviously, everybody remembers from the Kentucky Derby and being on the Derby Trail. Now is cutting back, and that seemed to just fit him like a glove last time out, winning that Dwyer in impressive fashion by 7.5 lengths. I don't know how great that field was with regards to Hades and Bilal, but still, the horse seemed to put it all together, ran a big number in that race. And the horse that I'm particularly intrigued to see, I don't know how they'll be using this horse, is Timberlake, a horse that Brad Cox said after the Arkansas Derby was likely going to get turned back to a miler. And then he goes to the bench and comes back and runs in the Grade 1 Haskell, his first race off, which is the opposite of cutting back to a mile, going a mile and an eighth against Grade 1 Company. And that race should have just confirmed that he's a miler because he ran a really good mile and really struggled the last furlong. So I would imagine that he's a horse that could see that similar sort of buyer speed figure increase that we saw a horse like Domestic Product have the first time he tries going one turn.
Yeah, and just to touch upon Timberlake, I'm never somebody who has been in the Timberlake as a sprinter camp. I know that there are a lot of people who believe that. Yep. I wonder if Timberlake was just a highly developed 2-year-old that hasn't really gone on as a 3-year-old. That seems a little more likely to me, just given how his physical development transpired over time. But maybe this is the race to take a shot with him if you are of that opinion that he wants shorter.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see a lot of those types in terms of horses that are just very precocious and physically developed at 2, and then, just don't really grow that much at 3. And speaking of that, one of those horses is potentially in this next race, the Travers, and I'm referring to Fierceness, who was, of course, your Breeders' Cup juvenile winner last year and champion 2-year-old, but has maybe not taken the sort of step forward people thought he might. But listen, let's talk about the headlining race. Travers, Grade 1, 1.25 miles on the dirt. I found it interesting how you and I have completely different approaches to potentially how this race is playing out, with you really liking 2 horses that are going to be up on the front end and me liking 2 horses that are going to be coming from off the pace. This is an intriguing race, David. And again, I ask you from a morning line standpoint, you had 4 horses, Dornick, Fierceness, Thorpedo Anna, and Sierra Leone, who all felt like very similar horses. I mean, how much do you take into consideration just the amount of betting interest that Thorpedo Anna is going to take, and kind of explaining to folks at home, again, the morning line is not trying to predict who you think is the best horse first through fourth. It's trying to predict where the public's going to go.
Yes. And trying to predict where the public is going to go in a race like this can be difficult because a lot of these horses have fan bases, but I think those have evolved over time. And when you throw a horse like Thorpedo Anna into the mix, who hasn't faced these horses before, it's tough to really gauge her level of support against some of these others. I'll say when I was making the line earlier last week, hard to know when these are due at this point. I was going to make her the favorite. I had her as the 5-2 favorite. And this time for the Travers, I had the luxury of seeing the post draw before I had to submit the line. Whereas in the past, you guys have done the draw events where I have to submit the line before the draw happens, which I don't like, but sometimes that's necessary. So once I saw the post position draw, I kind of said to myself, well, the 2 horses that could be most affected by the draw are Fierceness, obviously, and Thorpedo Anna. And I might adjust either of those 2 if they draw any kind of extreme post position. And they both drew extreme post positions, with one getting the rail and the other getting the perfect outside post. So I did adjust her up a little bit and Fierceness down a little bit, which actually made them the co-second choices. So that's kind of how I was thinking about it. And also, as popular as Thorpedo Anna is, and as much as this story has kind of taken hold over the summer, once it's been confirmed that she's going to run, I don't know of too many handicappers in my circle that actually want to bet her in this race. So yeah. I wonder how much money she's going to take, fan support versus like hardcore wagering support. So I was trying to weigh both of those factors in creating the line.
Absolutely. No, I think it's a difficult challenge to do with these sorts of races and with this group in particular. But let's talk about your top pick, Dornick, 5-2, the morning line favorite. This horse is.
I actually think that you have my. I don't know if you can change it, but I think my picks are wrong here. Dornick, I made the value play, and my top pick is Unmatched Wisdom.
Oh, okay. I'm very sorry for that. Okay,
yep,
well,
no problem.
Talk about Unmatched Wisdom in that case, not batting down. My apologies. And so, talk a little bit about Unmatched Wisdom in this spot. That is your top pick.
So, Unmatched Wisdom is a horse that has some things to prove coming into this race. Clearly, he's never faced competition that's this tough before, really not even close to it. But as I was handicapping this race, and especially as I was thinking about Thorpedo Anna and what kind of scenario could make me interested in her in a race like this, because she is a horse that has some things to prove. I mean, she's been so visually impressive in her races, but she's got to get a little faster. And as I was thinking about her, I was kind of thinking to myself, well, I know she's a filly and he's a colt, but Unmatched Wisdom kind of has a very similar profile in that he's run, those high 90 buyers. He's been so visually impressive, but kind of like her, he's never faced competition that's tough. The difference is he's going to be 2 or 3 times the price of Thorpedo Anna in all likelihood. And when I watch his races, I just get the sense that there's more there. The first 2 starts, clearly, he was never really asked for his best. He didn't have to be. He won so easily. But the last time in the Curlid, I know Corporate Power got within a length of him at the wire that day. When I watched that race, once Unmatched Wisdom got to the front, I mean, he just kept like flicking his ears back and forth, waiting for the next cue from Flavien Prat. And even at the top of the stretch, once he was asked for run, I mean, he kicked away from Corporate Power, flicked his ears, like he said, forward, like, is my job done yet? And then Flavien had to set him down again. And he switched over his left lead approaching the wire. Just felt like, yeah, the margin was just decreasing at the end, but also the horse just wasn't totally focused. And Chad Brown has said on a number of occasions that he believes this horse is going to be better with a target. And I know some people are handicapping this race with him being a speed. I think the plan is to take him a little off the pace and ride him as a stalker, potentially in behind some of those speed runners. And watching his races, I think that's really going to work for him because he's a horse that kind of wants to track and then go catch that target. And you can see him sort of, realize once he gets past the horse from the races. So is he good enough to beat the main players in here? I don't know, but I believe he's going to run well. And I think the price is going to be enough for me to find out. So I picked him in this race because he's the one that I want to bet. I just couldn't make a strong enough case to bet any of the favorites in here.
David, I hear you on Unmatched Wisdom, and I think that one of the things that I tried to point out, I just did a Travers Spotlight video on him the other day. People who think that he's a rabbit for Sierra Leone are crazy. He is not a rabbit for Sierra Leone. First of all, there's plenty of pace in this race without him in it. So it's not like Chad needs another horse to press the pace. There's plenty. And I was saying, I was talking to someone the other day that I had the opportunity to speak to a lot of different press up here, local press, who talked to a lot of the trainers. There's a gentleman up here, Roger Weiland, for the local news. And he was talking to Chad before the meet even started. And he was talking about Sierra Leone and the Travers and all this stuff. And Chad stopped in mid-sentence and said, don't forget, I have a horse named Unmatched Wisdom. He might be the best of the group. Chad's had a very high opinion of this horse. And I think that's something that's very noteworthy in this spot. 8-1, you're absolutely right, getting much better value. You went to the other Chad. I went to the main Chad. Feels like maybe we're, on a bit of a turf race here. But I ultimately went to Sierra Leone, who I appreciate you making the kind of highest choice out of the favorites, because that was probably the only way I was going to use this horse is and I think from a betting standpoint, this horse probably will be the 4th choice going into post. I think Dornick's going to get a lot of support. I think Thorpedo Anna is going to get a lot of support. I think Fierceness, just people love that horse. Todd Pletcher, Mike Rapoli, it's a New York type of a horse. He's going to get a lot of support. And Sierra Leone, I just feel like this is the race he was bred to win. The 1.25 should do just fine, and you're going to get ample pace in this race. I agree with you about Unmatched Wisdom not necessarily being breakneck. I actually think the horse that could be the breakneck horse up front is Batten Down, that nobody's kind of taking into consideration. I think Juniors knows he's got to be aggressive with that horse out of the gate, and he's the one who could be the fly in the ointment to some extent for Dornick and for Fierceness and even for Thorpedo Anna potentially. And so that's the one that I think could really kind of muck up the pace or make it even a little bit faster than it might already be on paper. But when you have Dornick and Fierceness going at it up front, you have Thorpedo Anna presumably in that pocket trip kind of on the inside, and potentially Batten Down pressing or even trying to get to the lead from an inside position. I just think it sets up for a horse that likes the distance, is going to close, nearly won the Kentucky Derby, has never finished out of the exacta, has actually gotten progressively faster throughout his career. I wish he had gotten by Fierceness in that Jim Dandy, because I felt like he maybe hung a little bit in that race, because you look at those strides of Fierceness coming down the stretch and it was shortening up, and his stride was nice and long. And I thought, man, you have every chance to get by, and you just didn't do it. But that Belmont Stakes race, we talked about it on other races. That was a pretty speed favoring track throughout that whole week. And I felt like he was running against the track as much as he was running against himself sometimes, as well as the rest of the field. I was encouraged by the fact that he seemed to straighten out last time a little bit more effectively. You didn't see the weaving throughout the lane that you had seen in some of his previous races. Flavian put him right on the rail, which seemed to be a beneficial thing. So I'm interested in seeing what this horse can do, but I think he's just got loads of talent. And I'm really interested in seeing whether he can pull it off and whether he can make that amazing run down the lane coming for home, because one thing, he's going to make his run. He always does. It's just whether or not he can get there in time and whether or not the race kind of sets up for him.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting a little tired of him, because I feel like the case that you've made for him is the same case that people have made the last couple of times in a row. Like, Oh, he's supposed to win the Belmont. It's the right pace scenario. It's the right race. Well, wait a minute. He's going to win the Jim Dandy. I mean, there are 5 speeds in Sierra Leone. He's got to win the race. And he's kind of just keeps falling short, but like he keeps running faster speed figures. So he kind of keeps drawing you back in. I agree that he's going to run well in this race, because he always does. I picked him third in here. I just didn't want to have him on top. And, I'll jump into the horse that I made my value play. And I probably confused you in doing this, breaking the rules a little bit. I mean, I highlighted Dornock as the value play, which he's the morning line favorite. But, value to me isn't just a big price. I mean, it's a horse that you think is going to be the right price. And, as I go through this field, I think I'm getting the right price based on what I think his chances of winning are for Unmatched Wisdom. And as I look at the rest of these, especially the 4 favorites, the horse that among them and I think is going to be the right price is Dornick. If I could have, I would have made Thorpedo, Sierra Leone, Dornick, and Fierceness all 3-1, but I don't think anyone would like me doing that. But I mean, that's kind of how I feel about the line for this race. I don't know if Dornick's going to be the favorite, but I think the public's kind of view him in a clump with the rest. But I personally view him as clearly the most likely winner of this race. He is the one horse that is coming in without really anything to prove. I mean, he's run at this level. He's gotten trips that can be a little taxing, particularly in the Belmont. Yeah, maybe it was a little bit with the track, but that was a taxing pace. And he just kept turning away challenge after challenge. And he's so gritty. And when you look back through his past performances, I mean, it's just pretty clear at this point that when he gets that opportunity to kind of stick his head in front around the far turn, he's not going to lose. I mean, he just keeps fighting and grinding away and battling back, and he just finds a way to win. So I'm not that concerned about him failing to show up in the race. As with Sierra Leone, I mean, I think we can view them in a similar light in that sense. But I do trust Dornock to sort of bear down and actually win the race when it matters. So basically what I'm saying is I'm highlighting him as the value play, because if I'm betting exotics in this race, he's the horse I want to key around. If I'm betting trifectas or boxing things, he's the horse that I want to use with Unmatched Wisdom and key the both of them in wagers, whether it's multi-race sequences, because I think for me, they're the 2 horses where their prices are going to be commensurate to their chances of winning.
He is a horse that I've become a big fan of in terms of Dornock, and he's just a stubborn son of a gun when he gets up there on the front end, and he just does not like horses getting past. And I remember someone pointed out that in the Fountain of Youth, which he won rather non-impressively that day, and that was a scratch depleted field. Locked was supposed to be there, Speakeasy, Victory Avenue, all these horses scratched out, and he was really not facing much competition, and he won by about 2 lengths, and it was not what people expected. And he went off as an overwhelming, I think, 1-9 favorite that day or close to it. And but somebody pointed out he was just flicking his ears the entire time. He was just looking for someone to come challenge him, because that's kind of just the horse that he is. He doesn't really start to give his best until he knows he has to. And he's going to be challenged. I mean, Fierceness is going to try to, sit that outside post position and just hit that same trip he did in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, and a little bit similar to what he did last time out in the Jim Dandy. You have Batten Down who's going to challenge him. Thorpedo Anna is going to make her run at some point at him. You talk about Unmatched Wisdom kind of making a move, and he's going to get his challenges. But he's repelled all of them to this point. And we make a big deal about that run Catholic Boy made. The fact that Dornock's done it now 3 straight, times basically when he's on the front end in the Remsen, in the Belmont and the Haskell, lets a horse get by him and then fights back. And you just don't see that very often. And just a really cool horse, and one that I think has developed a huge fan base as a result. I just want to talk very briefly about my value play, I should say, which is Shug McGahee's number 4 Corporate Power. This is the horse that finished second to Unmatched Wisdom last time out in that Curlin. Horse won the Sir Barton 2 back. And this is one, part of me, I'm always a sucker for Shug McGahee horses. I think he manages his horses incredibly well. He places his horses well. He's not going to put a horse in a race that's kind of over their heads. I don't think. Shug has won this race 4 different times actually over the years. So he knows what it takes to win the Travers. I think this one is going to like the distance, obviously, with the Curlin up top. I think, has shown the ability to get stronger as races go on throughout his career. And the other thing is, unlike Sierra Leone, unlike potentially Honor Marie, we'll see what the blinkers do with Honor Marie, but, potentially unlike those 2 horses who are going to be closing from maybe double digits back, Corporate Power should be sitting kind of just behind that clump of horses that want to be forward, and might just kind of get the first crack and kind of get a good trip in that regard. And maybe a horse like Fierceness, who might be distance compromised, or maybe Thorpedo Anna doesn't quite measure up. I think there's some, maybe Batten Down starts to get a little bit tired at the end if the pace is a little too fast. And so I just think Corporate Power could end up being a horse that kind of trips out, as the kids say, and, gets the right sort of setup in this race. And I don't know. I don't have the horse picked up top. I have him as my second choice. But I just think it's a horse that I'm interested in using in maybe some different ways in vertical wagers in this race. And again, if I ever go broke, it's probably because I keep betting on Shug McGahee horses too often. But he's a trainer that I tend to like in these types of spots, and I just think this horse has some upside potential, just like you talked with Unmatched Wisdom, except you're getting maybe even a little bit more of a price with this one. But it's going to be a fascinating race. And let me tell you something, at the top of the stretch, if Thorpedo Anna is anywhere near the lead, this place is going to be deafening on Saturday at Saratoga. So this one's going to be a spectacle for sure. Well, let's head to the bailout race. And I think I actually have the right race.
We're set for this one.
Yeah, we're all set for this last one. And that is the 14th race, because after you have 5 straight grade ones, what you really need is a $50,000 maiden claimer for 3-year-olds and up, going a mile out of the Wilson chute. And I will probably be hanging out by the chute, because that's right where by my office is actually. And David, I'll let you talk a little bit about your top pick here. Deputy Mischief, 5-1 on the far outside. I mentioned sometimes you get worried about that far outside post position on the Wilson chute, but this one is a very good horse, and I think is an interesting potential. I shouldn't say very good horse. We're talking about a maiden still, but I think this is an intriguing horse nonetheless in this spot at 5-1.
Yeah, I got a little concerned about the post because you don't see too many horses winning from post 10 on the Wilson chute. But I will say in this race, there are a lot of plotting types to his inside that I don't think are going to be difficult to clear. And this horse does have tactical speed, and Linda is putting the blinkers on first time out for her barge. So I think the intention is going to be go forward and just try to clear as many horses as you can. And I think it's going to be possible to clear quite a few. I just think, first off, the trainer switch to Linda, getting realistic, probably not a maiden special weight type of horse. Actually is coming out of a race that might be even a little better than the speed figure indicates, because the top two finishers have both come back to improve. Digital Ops was a sneaky good fourth last week with an 87 buyer. Pentathlon came back to win with a 96 buyer, so I think that was a pretty solid race. And I just think this horse is getting class relief that he needs, still with some upside. And he's where I wanted to go in here. I mean, it's the kind of race where we could talk about almost every horse and actually have a pretty interesting discussion, because there's a lot to go through. If this were a race on a Wednesday, it might be one of the most interesting races on the card. But at the end of Travers Day, I'm just kind of too exhausted to do it.
I hear you about that. We've already done this for an hour and a half, and so I'm right with you. I went to a class dropper as well as my top selection. You're right. There's a lot of plotting types in this race, and I went to the number 2 Storm Ready for 4-1 for Todd Pletcher. Jose Gomez up on the mount, and this one is taking the class drop and going from turf to dirt. Interestingly enough, over the last 5 years, Pletcher has been 23% turf to dirt for all maidens and 28% turf to dirt on the class drop for maiden special weight 2 maiden claimers. So, clearly one that has the ability to kind of, this sort of move is not irregular for Pletcher, and he's had some success. And again, this one has been competitive at the maiden special weight level on the turf. And so now, like I said, switching over, showed a little bit better speed the last time out. I hope some of that translates over to this final race, because, again, you're going to need to show a little bit more speed. You don't want to get trapped too far back, I feel like, coming out of that chute. So that's where my top pick was. My value play, the number 6 Holton at 6-1 for Bill Mott, one that took the class drop last time out to a maiden 75, but did so over a sloppy still track, and willing to give this one a second chance over a drier fast track, and actually ran pretty well in a couple of maiden special weight races over a dry track back last year as a 2-year-old. So again, just willing to give this one another opportunity. Maybe just didn't like the wet conditions that day and never really kind of got underway and was a little bit more one pace. So going to take a shot, like I said, with that one at 6-1. But you went to the other Linda as your final selection for the day as a value play, which was Always Be Smart, the number 7 horse.
Yeah, I'm all led to Rice in the last race. I think if Linda's going to win a race on Travers Day, it will be fitting for her to win the last race of the day. That's her kind of MO. Always Be Smart. Second off the claim for this barn. I actually thought he ran pretty well first off the claim last time. The same race that Holton's exiting, I believe. And I thought that the rail, so there was that extreme rail bias on August 1st. And I thought the rail was starting to get good at the end of the July 31st card. And Always Be Smart was just outside every step of the way. And he's a horse that has had more chances than some others, but he's run well on a number of occasions. And I think if there is any pace in this race, he'll be running on at the end.
Well, David, we did it. 14 races. We got through all of them. I owe you a beer when I see you next time for sure for going an hour and a half. And so I really appreciate it. It's going to be a great day. I appreciate you coming on, sharing your insights. Let the folks know what all you have going on, where they can find all of your content and all the good stuff.
Oh, it's just fun doing it with you. First of all, I just want to say it's a card that really merits the conversation because there's so much great stuff to look forward to on Saturday. Yep, I'll have my picks up on NYRA.com, NYRA.com/timeformUS. You can find all of my picks for the card. Also on DRF.com, I'll have write-ups there. I do the betting strategies with Mike Beer every Saturday of the Saratoga meet. So you can find that information about that, or purchase it in a PP package on DRF.com, where we'll give out picks and our plays and our analysis of the entire card. So also got some videos up on the DRF YouTube channel if you want to find some of my analysis there.
Awesome. Always appreciate your insight, David. Really do. And thank you so much again for joining me. And thank you all for watching this episode of Capping the Card. Make sure to press that like button. And listen, if you're still watching after 97 minutes, come on, you got to subscribe to the NYRA Bets YouTube channel. So listen, thank you so much. For David Aragona, my name is Matthew DeSantis. Wish you a great and prosperous day at the races. And reminding you, friends, it's now post time.